Hello. Welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. So, what is Civilization Jihad? So, for those of us in Canada and in the United States, this one document that was discovered by in the Muslim Brotherhood's and one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, a hidden sub basement, is called the Explanatory Memorandum. It was used in 2007 as evidence in the United States versus Holy Land Foundation trial. This document revealed for the first time to the United States government, and we'll say to Canada also, its people that they have a real enemy, a group that had previously been dismissed, but this enemy is very real. What does this document say in it? In one small paragraph, it has a power-packed piece. It says, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all that the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And there is no escape from that destiny, except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers, the mujahideen, be equal? Now, I have a guest that hopefully will be joining us soon, and he's with Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. Now, David Nitkin, hoping he will join us soon, has an incredible history of standing up for what is right. David Nitkin, again, hoping he joins us soon, is an internationally known ethicist and teacher. He's as a corporate responsible professional of the president of Ethics Scan Canada. He's served many public and private sector clients. He served in leadership roles for Canadians and for the rule of law, the Muslim-Jewish dialogue, israelah.ca. You can go to the site israelah.ca. The Israel Activist Alliance of Canada, Canadian Friends of Tazpit, and StopSponsoringHatred.com. I'm hoping he logs in at any second now. Yes, he is. So I'm going to bring him right in. Hello, David.
Hi, how are you?
I was just reading out, I don't know if you heard me, I was reading off your bio. It's very, very impressive. And just in case you don't know, my background, I have a bachelor's in religion and philosophy. I enjoyed my studies on ethics. And I did not realize we have some common ground there. This was impressive. So I was wondering if you could tell people about what the Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedom does first, and a little bit more about yourself.
All right. So Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a Canadian-based group that's all of 6 months old. We're purpose-built. It's a group of volunteers that was assembled on what we believe is the most important popular discussions since the Quebec referendum debate, the Quebec separation debate, and that's M103, which is a piece of motion and referendum material which is now before a senior parliamentary committee in Ottawa. And if this goes the way we think it is, it will introduce Sharia law into Canada. So there are hearings that are taking place by a multi-party agency of the Canadian government called the Heritage Committee, and that's the ones that are debating systemic racism in Canada, and the bill to address that is M103.
Now, I was reading one of the articles that was, what really kills me, you sent out today. And I have to be honest to tell everybody, I was not fair to David. I saw an article he promoted today, and I called him right away after reading it. I know it's not his article, but there are certain things in this article that, oh my gosh, it's powerful. And this is the one thing that kills me. You got an article written by a member of Parliament. And
written by one of the people who's actually a member of that committee. And so what that member of the committee pointed out is something that's transparent to hundreds of thousands of Canadians, which is that the bill that was proposed is an attempt to address anti-Muslim sentiment. But the language talks about Islamophobia. And the person who is developing the material that you saw today points out the contradiction in testimony before this committee over its last hearings of the last 3 or 4 weeks, which is that for some people, Islamophobia means criticism of Islam, which is to be a concern, and good and righteous people are all concerned that all religions are protected, including the Islamic faith. The problem is that there is something called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. That includes 64 countries in the United Nations, and they have a very different definition of Islamophobia. They are promoting the notion that criticism of Islam is haram, it is forbidden. And in those countries, you can be punished up to and including death for criticizing Islam or criticizing the Prophet. And it's that definition of Islamophobia that some of the members of the committee are using, and other members of the committee don't appreciate that that's the au courant term internationally. And so we have a very serious dilemma here. We have many people in Canada that obviously want to prevent racism and want to be doing the right thing. The problem is that the initiators of this particular motion know what the true meaning of Islamophobia is, and I happen to be the co-chair of the Muslim-Jewish Dialogue, and we have dozens of Muslims that are participants there who cannot believe how stupid Parliament is for not recognizing that they fled Islamophobia. They know exactly what it means. And the perpetrators of this motion have phrased it almost as a mental illness, as a disease, as the notion that to criticize Islam is ridiculous and a mental aberration. Now, certainly any legitimate criticism of Islam has to be taken into its face value, which is that there are elements in Islam that are problematic. And so if you're talking about wife beating, if you're talking about female genital mutilation, if you're talking about stoning of gays, if you're talking about racial slurs of blacks and gays, if you're talking about some of the elements that are embedded in the Islamic faith, that's a concern. And the perpetrators of this motion are saying that free speech that criticizes legitimately those elements of Islam which are a frightening prospect for Muslims as well as all other religious faiths, that will be prohibited and that will be created as a mental aberration if proponents of this motion go ahead and introduce it as legislation in Canada.
I just want to read a couple of these aberrations. So, September 18th, we're talking about this year, they said Islamophobia, this is by Mr. Arif Virani, I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. He said, Islamophobia to me means uttering death threats, assaulting hatred, threats of violence towards people, and vandalism of their place of worship. Another one. This is also said on September 18th by Ikra Khalid, another member of Parliament. She said, the definition of Islamophobia I subscribe to is an irrational fear or hatred of Muslims or Islam that leads to discrimination.
She is the proponent of the bill. She is someone that worked for the Muslim Student Association of Canada, which is known to be part of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. So this is a woman who has credentials that indicate that she has a very fundamental understanding of what it means to undermine Canadian and Western values. And she was pleaded and she was begged, please, let's not use the term Islamophobia. Let's use the term anti-Muslim. And she's refused. And these were people in her own party, the Liberal Party, including the former Justice Minister, who said, don't use Islamophobia because it means something different than what you're meaning it to be before this committee. And she said, no, I'm not changing the meaning of the word.
So, yeah, and this is where it gets into September 20th. I'm going to read a couple of these, and this will make you think. This is a definition Tarek Fatah reported. Tarek Fatah is one of the writers of, I believe it's Toronto Star, and he's also the founder of Muslim Canadian Congress. So this is what he, his definition he found in the Oxford English Dictionary. An intense dislike or fear of Islam, especially as a political force. Hostility or prejudice towards Muslims. So here's the other one he found. He says, quote, then there is the definition by Andrew Cummins, who once said in a quote that's often misattributed to Christopher Hitchens, that Islamophobia is a word created by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons. I love that one. In truth, the whole word Islamophobia came from the International Institute of Islamic Thought. That's where it was created, for the purpose of shutting down discussions.
So what we're dealing with is an ideology that is largely foreign to traditional Islam. In other words, the idea of political Islam or Islamic thought is really 1930s, and it's the fascist movement within Islam that is being perpetrated throughout the world, and it's responsible for ISIS, it's responsible for the Muslim Brotherhood, it's responsible for all of this anti-Western thought. And what this motion is doing is conflating the two, which is we want to prevent systemic discrimination, but we also want to recognize that there are people that are putting forward this narrow definition of Islamophobia so that they will delegitimize any criticism of Islam, which can only lead to the overthrow of a democracy. If you look through some of the submissions that have come to this parliamentary committee, what is astonishing to most people is that they know that the single largest group, which is the subject of hate in Canada, are Jews. The second largest is blacks. The third largest is gays. Way, way down the list are Muslims. Now, that doesn't mean that Muslim hate is inconsequential, but what it does mean is you have 3 times the number of Muslims as Jews, but 1/3 the number of criticisms of Muslims compared to Jews. And what the proponents of this bill are saying, yeah, but there's a 253% increase in anti-Muslim hate speech. That may very well be true, and that's lamentable, but the numbers pale beside other elements of anti-hate speech, and they also pale in terms of painting a picture which is inaccurate. Most of the participants in the Muslim-Jewish dialogue and most of the participants in our C3RF organization are convinced that there isn't substantial systemic discrimination or racism in this country. There are a few individuals that need to be of concern to every good-minded person. But by and large, we are a tolerant, open society. We don't have many of the problems that are present in other countries. We don't have a long history of the Muslim Brotherhood being as active in our country as it's been in other countries. But that is changing now, and we need to be very sensitive to that. There is one Muslim Brotherhood charity last year alone that raised $14 million in Canada for humanitarian relief for Hamas. Humanitarian relief. We know where that money is going. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is the Muslim Brotherhood is supporting certain government ministers and supporting certain government programs and supporting certain radical imams to promote the notion that we need to put a stop to free speech in Canada. And that's of great concern to members of C3RF and hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and we're sure that that's the large majority of Canadians.
I think I want to tell you about an article that's out there also today that you should promote on your site. It's by the American Center for Democracy, acdemocracy.org. I'll be reading this later today. I will not be reading the whole article, but I'm going to tell you it's called The U.S. Pro-Islamist Neighbor. And who are we talking about? Thank you, Trudeau. But particular article I think you would find invaluable as a resource, and it does list a lot of hate statements by Muslims. So, I mean, right now they're going after people who make statements against Islam, but they're really not going after Muslims who have made statements of hate against others, particularly Jews.
I think this is a serious problem for us because these are people that are bringing in a foreign ideology to Canada and bringing in the notion that you can do and say anything that you want. And I think there are a large number of Canadians, both immigrant and Indigenous Canadians, who are saying, wait a minute, we don't want this intolerance. We don't want this discrimination here in Canada. So we do have a problem, and it is growing, and it is well funded by international sources of the Muslim Brotherhood that are trying their best to destabilize this country.
What about here's something that's way down the pike you could think about. Why not start shipping them back if Syria is a safe country now? ISIS is on the run. They're heading home. We're seeing numerous articles in counterterrorism articles that are written about how they're all heading home to different countries. So why not ship them, the majority of these people, home since their country is no longer a threat? I mean, not that it ever was, but...
Well, I think we need to have some nuance here. There are large numbers of Canadians that support offering refuge to people from around the world. There are a large number of Yazidis. There are a large number of Christians who are oppressed by radical Islam in their home countries. And so Canadians are saying those are people that we have always traditionally welcomed and we would like to continue to welcome. Part of the problem here is that the Syrian refugees really don't constitute a refugee as defined by the United Nations. This is a political move on the part of the Trudeau government to bring people over here, some of which are in need of help, but many of them would not choose Canada if they had a choice. If they could be reconstituted back in a healthy Syria, they would prefer to live over there than to come over here. It's colder here. It's a language they don't know and are familiar with, and many of them have spent depressing years in refugee camps outside of Syria. So I don't think the issue is as much shipping people back. I think what we would like to do is to continue to open our doors and recognize that that's how our country grows, by healthy immigration. The problem is that what you want to do is to make sure that the people that are coming over here share your particular values. And some of the problems have been that when we've looked at particular families that have been brought over here, we recognize that in some cases we have child brides that are 9, 10, and 11 years of age. In some cases, we have people whose political ideology is not consistent with an open society in Canada. And we have a few imams that are preaching hatred. We have a few people that are fomenting problems in our country. And it doesn't matter whether they're Muslim or something else. If these people are bringing in values that are intending on disrespecting or violating Canadian values, those are people that we should be wanting to screen out in the first place. Now, the Canadian government says, well, we are checking with all police authorities and police officials before we let these people in. Well, we know that most of the police officials and authorities do not exist in Syria or in some of these other locations, so you don't have a reasonable vetting. So I think what I'm saying to you is I'm not in favor of shipping people back. Canada wants to be open to refugees. They're going to be part of the cosmopolitan character of the country. But what we do want to do is to make sure that those people who are deliberate in their intent to overthrow the values of this country and to repress free speech, that those people are told, frankly, you don't belong here.
And that's I think that's the all-important thing. It should have been done initially, and that's what you're saying. It should have been done initially. How much of a reality chance is this passing M103 in Canada? How close is it to passing?
We believe it's very, very close because, unfortunately, there will be a vote on party lines. And so what you have is the Liberals as a majority, and they will be joined by the NDP, which is the third party. And so together they will pass a motion which is probably going to mean the allowability of Sharia law in domestic affairs. Please understand that in 2005, Quebec, the second largest province, and Ontario, the largest province in the country, came within a hair's breadth of introducing Sharia law in this country. We were not well led. We didn't understand the nature of the problem back in 2005. And if not for some secular Muslims that said, you don't realize the problems you're going to create, we would already have Sharia law here in Canada. Fortunately, we don't yet, but there is a majority on this particular committee, and there will, when that committee makes this recommendation to Parliament, the Liberals have a majority, and if they force a vote on the basis of party ranks, then in effect we will have an Islamophobia definition, which is no criticism of Muhammad or the Prophet. We will have a suppression of free speech, and we will have the introduction of Sharia law. And that could be as early as 3 months from now.
Wow, 3 months. I had no idea that we were that close. Wow. And this is now in the now. Could you? I keep hearing the term. I know I went to your M103 event in Toronto. I was there.
Right.
Cal Fritzy was also one of our hosts. She was also there. And I found it invaluable. It was highly organized, highly secure. It was very, very professionally done. And for those fools out there who would think there was hate speech or something going on, boy, you needed to listen to that because you would not hear any hate speech. In fact, it was probably one of the most all-accepting events I've been to in quite a long time. And I found it very interesting that it was. And they had somebody speaking for the LGBT, whatever you want to, the gay community. There was somebody speaking for the feminist community. It was incredible. I was very. It was
a genuine rainbow of expression of opinion. I think your listeners need to know that there is a fundamental difference in the mindset of Canadians and Americans. Not necessarily better, but different. And so for Americans, your motto is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Consider what the Canadian motto is, which is peace, order, and good government. If you think
You're
about
going to lose the last one.
they really give you a sense of the character of the country. So we're a little bit more reserved here. We're a little bit more open. We're a little bit more networking and protective of minorities. We don't have the melting pot that you do. Ours is respecting traditions that you bring. You keep your language. You keep your newspapers. You keep your identity far more than might be the case in the U.S. I haven't said better in Canada. I've just said different. And
in the United States, we no longer have the melting pot. It's
okay,
actually
right.
it's now the new process since our last president is accommodation, not not assimilation. That was changed.
So what we do have here in this country, unfortunately, is a different government on our part by Mr. Trudeau. His brother is a major propagandist for the Palestinian radical cause. He gets money in his Trudeau Foundation from some very bad repressive regimes internationally, whose majorities happen to be Muslim. And he is known in Canada not for putting his hand out to the Muslim community, but for putting his hand out to those that can only be called the radical Muslim community. I know several heads of progressive Muslim organizations. I know several heads of moderate mosques. They have said that he consistently refuses to speak to them or to hear them. And so what you have from the Prime Minister on down is certain select members of the Prime Minister's office and certain of his senior officials that don't have the traditional notion of Canada in terms of free speech. And what they are is joining common cause with those people that would bring a definition of Islamophobia and attempt to argue that it's anti-Muslim, which it's not. We've already made it clear that the two terms are not the same, so that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are not equivalent. Anti-Semitism has an equivalence in anti-Muslim, but Islamophobia is delegitimizing proper fear and concern about radical Islam, and that's the difference. And so what we have is a political leadership here that is of significant concern to large numbers of Canadians, and that's why there was over 600,000 people who wrote to their MP at the time that this bill was proposed in Parliament. Earlier this year in the spring, there were hundreds of thousands of people who said, we're concerned. We don't think that there's a problem of systemic racism in this country. We don't like the idea about conflating Islamophobia with anti-Muslim. And we're concerned that you're going to criminalize or demonize those people that have a genuine, legitimate fear of Islam. But that doesn't seem to have influenced the Liberal majority either on this Heritage Committee, or we're afraid when the Heritage Committee reports and asks for endorsement and passing of changed legislation or changed policies, that will be passed by the Government of Canada.
It almost makes me wonder what would happen if someone yells Allah Akbar in the Parliament. I mean, that's unfortunately, they've had that happen in not too distant past, or someone has actually yelled that on their way in, trying to get in. But
we did have that last year. We did have a radical Muslim individual who attacked Parliament, who shot and killed an officer of Parliament, and actually had to be killed because he was a direct threat, because there were parliamentarians quivering behind closed doors in the same hall, because here was a shooter, a supporter of radical Islam, that was trying to kill as many parliamentarians as he could.
And yet they don't see there as any discussion of rational fear. I think you're right that the big discussion here is terminology on rational fear. I mean, is it rational to fear the people who are trying to kill you? Absolutely. If the word phobia has to be dropped, because that by itself says it's irrational, and their definitions don't work with a term that would be irrational, and it's just kind of sad. I don't understand why they can't figure that out, except for the person who's pushing it is Brotherhood, Equani, and that's an important thing. I don't know how I can help you in the long run. I would love to push out something I'm willing to travel up to Canada if, again, I know I'm not the big well-known person, but I'm willing to speak to anybody for you.
We would be happy to continue to involve and engage you. We have a number of international speakers that indeed are flourishing and are appearing on our website on a regular basis, and that are part of rallies that are being held here in this country. I think you've accurately captured things in terms of the abuse and the misuse of language. Let me give you a for instance. You've probably never heard the term forced suicide, but it is something that we are seeing among social workers in Toronto, in Montreal, in Vancouver, and in Ottawa. What is forced suicide? Because it's not being reported in the media. You've heard about honor killings and family killings. This is the ultimate in devastation as represented by radical Muslim extremism. This is where you make the life of a daughter or a second wife or a woman within your household so miserable that she actually takes her own life. So you don't have to kill her now. And so what we are beginning to see, but not being reported in the press, is women that are so oppressed in terms of beating, in terms of hunger, in terms of deprivation, in terms of not being allowed out, that they would actually choose death rather than continue to be submissive in the way that they're forced to being. And so we have some of these practices. They're not the majority. It's not all Muslims, but it is a radical minority that would transform the character of Canadian society and represent a serious challenge to freedom of speech. And that's what we need to be fearful of.
Well, would you like to tell everybody how they can keep in contact with with your organization and how they can volunteer?
Okay, so there are 2 or 3 things that you can do. Number one, you can go on the site and ask to receive our literature. That's Concerned Canadians, or better yet expressed as Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. You can go on the site. You can get the literature. If you want to make a donation to be able to support the work that we're doing in terms of publicizing this material, you can go on the site. The second thing you can do is to participate in any one of the rallies that are taking place across this country in many communities, large and small. And third of all, we have a wonderful Vimeo library. So some of the same people that you talked so complimentary about at our conference in Toronto and in Calgary in September, all of what they've had to say, both the full videos, the Q&As, and certain highlight excerpts are available on the website. So you can go and become a member. You can go and participate in terms of contributing to support our not-for-profit organization. You can go and download any one of a number of reports and studies, and you can promote the many rallies and conferences and seminars that are being held across this country.
Thank you. I will be in London, Ontario next Saturday with Pegida Canada. So
Great.
I'm going to give that a shot again. I've faced off against Antifa one time there. They had an event this past month, and one of the organizers was actually assaulted. So we'll see what happens this time. And
I wish you a very safe visit.
I look at it this way: if you serve the living God, you have nothing to fear with what's in front of you, because God gives you armor for your front, and and then you only have to you don't have to watch your back, because that's the cool thing about the armor of God. He didn't give you any armor for your back, so He's supposed to get it. That's how I'm looking at this.
But the God I pray to also says that you have to look after yourself. You can't continue to wait for God to provide that protection. That at a certain point you need to be proactive. You need to recognize when you're under threat, and to believe that God will save you when God may be trying to save you and you don't realize His attempt to try and intervene is a mistake. So you can be a thoughtful religious believer, but what comes with the terrain is God has empowered us with free will, and we need to be prepared to step forward if it's a question about whether God is present and whether God is hearing each and every prayer or hearing each and every person in need. Those of us that are true believers recognize that our faith is unshakable, but we also recognize that we sometimes have to act when it may be that God may be tarrying.
I want to say thank you one more time. You came on at the last moment's notice. I just couldn't help but ask, because when I saw that article, I thought, wow, Cal did this wonderful piece on what's happening last night on the show last night, and it just fit, and your terminology, the way you've explained things, it's been perfect. I want to thank you again. I hope I can get your friend Scott Reed to come on sometime in the future too. I'd love to have him on also. I want to thank you, and I want to have you back someday soon. God bless.
Thank you.